Hey everyone, there's a weird, precise way to skip pretty much the entirety of Skate to Victory in LBP1, and recently there was a consistent setup found that made it viable to attempt in full game speedruns. I figured it was worth making a video tutorial for, so let's get into it. Here's a quick, high-level summary of how the skip works. When you get to the checkpoint at the first windmill, you'll perform a deload, removing the collision near the checkpoint by despawning a character that's midway through spawning out of the checkpoint. After performing the deload successfully, causing the landmass to fall through the floor, you'll do some more menuing to reload the collision. With the collision now deep inside the floor, the physics engine violently pushes the landmass out, causing it to shoot out and spin with a lot of speed. Grabbing the windmill sponge when this happens and releasing at just the right time causes you to fling all the way to the scoreboard at the other end of the level. I wish it were that simple, but of course quite a lot can go wrong here. Sometimes the landmass won't shoot out with speed, sometimes you'll miss the grab, sometimes you won't fling far enough, and sometimes you'll get a fling that's so powerful that you'll fly way past the scoreboard into the gas just beyond. If you go into this without knowing exactly what to do, it can seem pretty random. This is where the new setups come into play, which help minimize the unpredictable chaos of it all. So let's break this down into a bit more detail. At the beginning of the level, after the king's speech bubble, switch your controller number up then back down to register a new player. If you have more than one profile on your system, you might have to close the menu and choose the guest profile before switching back to the original controller number. This controller switching will cause a new sack person to spawn at the upcoming checkpoint, where you'll pause the game midway through the spawning animation, ensuring that the deload will succeed when the sack person times out. That pause is where the first of two important timings occurs. You'll have to watch one of the windmill sponges and pause within a 2-frame window to make the windmill behave predictably. I like to aim for a sponge position in the bottom right of the windmill to time my pause. If the sponge is touching the windmill's roof at all, then you've paused too early. If you pause on the first or second frame that there's a gap here, then the pause timing is good. Basically, you'll want a gap between the sponge and the roof, but for the sponge to also be touching the fence in the level background. If you pause and there's a gap between the sponge and the fence, then you're too late. So one of these 2 frames are where you want the game to be paused. If you mistime the pause, it's not the end of the world. If you pause too early, it may be possible to close the pause menu and re-pause as soon as possible to land on a good frame without the second character spawning in too far. If you pause too late, it may still be possible to get the skip out of sheer luck if you adjust your pause timing in a later step, but I wouldn't count on it. Anyway, after the second character despawns, close the pause menu and hold right to die in the gas. Then you'll want to spawn in 4 characters at the same time. Again, for a system with only one profile, it's as simple as incrementing the controller number 3 times, one by one. But if you have multiple profiles, then you'll need to quickly select guest between switching each controller number. After seeing the 4 players spawn in, you'll want to attempt to spawn in 1 more player. This will set you up for the reload, which will happen after the 4 originally spawned players all despawn, and the 5th player finally succeeds in spawning. You'll want to pause at a precise moment here as well while waiting for the 5th player to spawn. You won't be able to open the pause menu while you have the 5th player selected, so you'll need to pause the game by opening the XMB using the PS button instead. A good time to land the pause is pretty much as the bolt of the sponge is passing the edge of the windmill's left roof. Try to aim for the bolt to line up diagonally with the roof like this. It doesn't have to be exact, being a little late still works out fine a lot of the time. This pause is a bit more forgiving, not only because it seems to be less precise, but also because you can try 2 or 3 times to unpause and repause to try to land on a better frame before the players despawn and the reload happens. You'll want to keep the game paused until you hear the 4 players despawn. When that happens, close the XMB with the PS button and hold right and R1. In most cases, you'll immediately grab the sponge and start getting yanked around, during which you'll want to close these pop-up messages with the X button and time releasing R1 to get a good fling. Sometimes though, somewhat rarely, the 5th player won't spawn in just yet, and you'll have to wait about 10 seconds for them to spawn in. We're not sure why this happens, but just close the pop-up messages during this time and keep right and R1 held in preparation for the reload. As for the actual fling, if you did everything right up to this point, you should see your character swing around in a big loop, kinda like this. This part may take some practice, but I think depending on the speed of the fling, you're usually best off releasing R1 near the bottom of the loop to get a somewhat horizontal fling. You want to avoid maximizing your distance, as again it can be quite easy to fling too far and die in the water. Once you're in the air, you're in front of a blank background, so it can be really difficult to judge your speed and aim for the scoreboard. One thing you can do that helps is opening and closing your poppet, watching how much it lags behind, and reducing your speed if necessary to avoid overshooting the scoreboard. I've found that if your poppet seems to open nearly off screen, then you're probably going too fast, and you'll need to hold left to slow yourself down in the air. Again, it'll take some practice to correctly judge. Beyond that point, your fate lies in the hands of the LBP physics engine, as with this much speed, it's really easy to slam into the ground and get squished. Now, there is one more caveat to be aware of when you're doing full runs. Typically when you enter this level, you'll be on controller number 3, having done intro skip at the beginning of the run. So when you do the controller switching to spawn new players, you're actually going to end up on controller number 7 by the end of the level. This makes the swinging Safari cutscene skips weird, since you won't have any videos or voiceovers unlocked on this player. But more crucially, the typical way of doing deloads later in the run won't work since you're already on the highest possible controller number. So once you hit the scoreboard and quit to the pod, you'll want to change your controller to a lower number. If you switch down to controller 4 and then 3, you'll end up back on the player you completed first steps with, which means you'll get your costume, the puppet, and ability to hold to retry back. So make sure you remember to do that. So that's pretty much it. To summarize, here are the steps. Register a new player at the beginning of the level by shifting your controller number up then down. Spawn the new player and pause the game when the bottom right windmill sponge is past the windmill roof but still touching the background fence. Unpause when the player despawns and run to the right to die in the gas. Spawn 4 new players. Try to spawn a 5th player, then pause the game using the XMB when the windmill sponge bolt is lined up with the roof on the left. Wait until you hear 4 despawns. Unpause the game with the PS button and hold right in R1. Close out of the message boxes while timing your release of R1 at a good angle. Use your poppet to determine if you need to slow down in the air. Try not to die when you land. And in a full run, quickly switch to controller number 4, then 3 when you finish the level to avoid missing the cutscene skip. As with most strats, it takes some practice, but it's definitely run viable, at least at a high level. So give it a try and let me know if you find any ways of making it easier or more consistent. See you next time.